by Innovative Growth Solutions. For more info, visit igscorp.net. And now, please welcome your host of the Business Developers Network, Artie Ruderman.
Hello. In the context that business development is any activity that generates value, we have an interesting guest today. Jeff is the Director of Consulting Services for HLB Gross Collins, where he manages Grosse Collins advisory services, which include profit enhancement, business transition, planning, litigation support, valuation services, and internal control engagements. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is you'll notice I didn't really cover marketing and sales because business development really is a process. And Jeff works on the infrastructure side to make sure that marketing and sales can deliver, or the company can deliver what marketing and sales is communicating. HLB Gross Collins is a full-service certified public accounting and consulting firm that provides traditional accounting and audit services and specializes in technical guidance for internal tax, estate, and business consulting. Jeff is very interesting, is not only a graduate of University Chicago Booth School of Business, but even more notable, and thank you for your service, sir, United States Military Academy at West Point. Interesting, Jeff. You'll have to tell us what brought you there and how you got involved in accounting and business.
We could talk about the next couple of hours about West Point, but
I bet.
I'll try to keep it brief.
Jeff focuses on adding value to his clients by looking at all the pieces of his clients' current and future financial landscapes and looks to maximize the opportunities and, more importantly, to avoid pitfalls that are at each stage of his client's business's life cycle. Jeff is an expert in internal controls and IT assurance, risk management, and a certified Mindshop facilitator. Jeff, you'll have us interested, and we need to know what a certified Mindshop facilitator is.
Sure.
What you have had senior management positions for operations and finance with companies in an array of industries, with Fortune 500 companies, small and mid-sized firms, including technology startups. And I personally like that because you bring a real array of industries and expert advice from all kinds of industries and businesses. So Jeff's background, has given you how large and small companies manage those touch points for developing business from insight analytics all the way through developing a value proposition and communicating that through marketing and sales and outreach. Jeff, before we start, please tell us a little bit more about HLB Gross Collins.
Sure. HLB Gross Collins, we were founded in the late 60s, and so we've had clients that have been with us since founding. We are, as you said, a full-service accounting and consulting firm, but at our core, we are business advisors. So yes, we are accountants, but more importantly, we're problem solvers and we're business advisors, helping businesses grow, become more profitable. The HLB Association, we joined HLB International, which is an international association of accounting firms all over the world. We joined that association, it was just before I joined Grosse Collins, so maybe about 16 or 17 years ago. And what that association allows us is it allows us to have a global reach. And so there's approximately 600 HLB International firms all over the world, but each firm is independent. But at the same time, we get to know these other firms because we have, annual conferences that we attend. There's CEO conferences, there's tax conferences, there's audit conferences. So we actually get to know these partner firms all over the world. And through that association, we've developed an international practice. So for instance, there may be a business in Berlin that's buying a manufacturing facility in Georgia. So we'll get those sort of inbound referrals. And then there's also outbound referrals that we can make to our international partners. So we like to say we're local in touch, but global in reach. And the HLB International Association has given us that reach. We are an industry-focused firm as well.
Talk about that, what those industries might be.
Sure. So we have an industry focus on manufacturing and distribution, construction, healthcare, finance and real estate, service and technology, and then international as well. We kind of consider that a separate segment, although that touches on different other segments. And so the way we're organized as a firm is each segment has a practice leader that's responsible for being the expert in that particular industry or segment, via, whether it's manufacturing, distribution, or construction. And also that practice leader is responsible for growing that segment. Now, different practice leaders will have different ways that they do that. And then we have so you have the vertical leaders, then you have the horizontal leaders. So there's a director of audit, there's a director of tax, and then I'm the director of consulting services. So that's how we're organized as a firm. But again, at our core, we really think of ourselves as business advisors and helping businesses become more successful.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the HLB portion and that you do have an international reach. In Atlanta, you're one of the leading accounting firms, so I'm glad that you had mentioned that. But let's look at HLB Gross Collins growth. You started in the 60s, right? And then it began to grow. And talk about where it met its challenges and how it met its challenges. So you start out as a, I don't know, was it a partnership? Was it a few people? And how did it grow to how many employees does Grosse Collins have today?
Yes, so we have about 70 professionals. So yeah, I've seen a lot of growth during that time. We've probably tripled in size, and as far as the firm size, the number of people, and as far as revenues as well. But I would say, so we're a little bit at an inflection point because audit and tax services, just in general, it's a very slow growth area, and so we're not the only firm that faces this challenge. It's a very mature industry. It's a very saturated industry. And so if you look at national statistics for audit and tax, it's just a slow growth area. So I say we're at an inflection point because we're currently now kind of working on plans and devising plans on, how do we grow? Because at our core, right, we have the audit and tax, but then we have the advisory services. So really the future of the firm, I think, is going to be on the advisory side. And we're still kind of working through the best way to do that. Some of our competitors have made acquisitions. They've joined, or they've gotten acquired by other firms, or they've bought niche specialty consulting areas, and so maybe they purchase an IT consulting area, or maybe they purchased a tax consulting practice, and so those are things that we're looking at.
Well, professional services, and not necessarily just accounting, are restrained by billable hours. There's only 24 hours in a day. And as you just said, the rate you could charge is being suppressed by the competition. So the advisory services are key for all professional services. And Grosse Collins has grown in like you said, going horizontally and vertically. So by going into different industries and bringing on the talent to address those industries, the company is growing in many ways, not just through its audit and tax services, which is a good program for it. We talked about the geographic area, and you mentioned international. But let's talk about we talked about the specialties. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to repeat that. We talked about acquisitions and mergers, and that for professional companies, especially nationals and large regionals, that has been a focus. Is that something that Grosse Collins would be looking at in the future?
Well, as a firm, and it's interesting, we talked about this. We just had our leadership retreat not too long ago, and so every year we meet as a leadership team, and we reaffirm, our plan for the next 12 months, and also long-range plans as well. And we're committed staying independent. I mean, we've been approached by other firms to merge, and we're just committed to stay independent and have more control over our destiny, so to speak.
But let's move from HLB Gross Collins for a moment, because we're talking about mergers and acquisitions, which are very common now. So what advice would you give a company that is looking to merge or be acquired?
Well, first, what's the value proposition, number one. Number two, I think the price certainly is a important consideration. So we kind of get into these issues in my business transition practice, which is basically helping business owners, transition their business. So, there's a whole host of things to consider. Was there anything in particular that you wanted to dive into in that area, or?
Well, again, this isn't just related to Grosse Collins now. This is just in general information. Like when I'm brought in to develop business for companies and they understand that they're looking to sell, let's say, right? I look at, usually it's a multiplier of their EBIT. Right? Mm-hmm. Most owners, and I'm talking about privately held companies for a moment here, really think it's much higher than it actually is going to wind up. I don't know if that's disillusional or however, the advice would be sell your assets and keep the cash if that's what you're looking for. Or if you want to grow the company's revenue, maybe start selling your products and services for less because the buyer is interested in the target markets that you're selling and the accounts they're going to pick up that they feel they can sell more services to. So those are two different strategies, if you will. So in that context, when you're talking about a company looking for a merger or acquisition, from your viewpoint, the financial side and the consulting side, what advice might you give them?
Well, first of all, they're going to have to go through a due diligence process as well if they're going to be marketing themselves, to be selling. So kind of the process that we run is making sure that they have not necessarily audited financial statements. Audited financial statements would probably be the best. They at least would need to have reviewed financial statements, making sure there's no contingent tax liabilities out there, making sure that the financials actually reflect, the true conditions of the company. And then we usually run a process where we'll introduce them to some investment bankers and have them interview a number of different investment bankers. And then the investment banker is really going to be marketing that company, running a process for that company. In an ideal situation, they're setting up a bid where they're having, whether it's other private equity firms or other firms in that industry, that's going to raise the price if you have 4 or 5 companies kind of bidding on them. So that's kind of the process that we run them through. It's the most important decision that well, first of all, as a business owner, and again, let me take a step back. HLB Gross Collins, we don't deal with public companies. I mean, in my prior life, yes, I worked for public companies, but we are really specialist with working with private-owned companies, so no public companies. And so, we do have a lot of different sizes of companies, a lot of different industries, a huge range from clients that maybe have $300,000 or $400,000 of revenues to our largest client, which is probably $1 billion of revenue. So it's a really, really long range. So this will be the most important decision that this business owner will make, because the odds are this will probably be the first time and maybe the last time that they're going to be selling their business. And so a lot of them just, they need a lot of hand-holding. They need to kind of understand, what is the process. And so we kind of provide that guidance from them. So again, it kind of starts out with looking at their financial statements. Does the financial statements accurately reflect, do they have the right internal controls in place? Have they made, because a lot of clients that get into the situation, they've never gone through the process of having reviewed financial statements or audited financial statements. So when we start kind of getting in there and looking at the books and records of the company, we find that a lot of stuff maybe has not been recorded properly. And then, so that's kind of step one. Step two is we'll kind of run through a process of what is the value of the company. Now you can say, well, Jeff, you don't really need to do that because you can just the market will determine that. Well, yes and no. It's kind of important to get a value at the beginning, and the reason why is depending on the size of the company and how many business owners, the business owner needs to understand once they sell this business, how much cash are they going to actually put in their pocket, and is that going to be enough to retire on? Because oftentimes that's what happens. The business owner is getting older, they're retiring, and so we need to look at what is the business worth, how much cash are they going to put in their pocket after this transaction, and then if to your point, if they think the business is worth a lot more,
which is typical,
which is very typical. I do have instances where it was the reverse, which is very, very unusual. But so that's a perfect opportunity if they approach us early enough, is to say, hey, listen, here are some things we can do to help you grow your business and to become more profitable. And so let's maybe hold off and maybe not sell in the next 3 to 6 months. Maybe let's sell in the next 18 to 24 months. And let's do some consulting. Let's do some growth and profit consulting. So there's a presentation that I give to a lot of business owners and groups, which is basically how to maximize the value of a business. And I talk about, really the 3 levers that are going to drive value for your business. Is you have your cash flow, you have your growth in your cash flow, and then you have the riskiness of your cash flow. So there's things you can do in all 3 of those areas to make your business more valuable. And so that's why it's important to get a valuation at the beginning. And so if we can get into the process early enough, there's some things we can do across those 3 levers I mentioned to make that business more profitable. But then it's turning it over to the professionals that, we're not a transaction firm, we're business advisors, we're not investment bankers, but, part of our job is maintaining a network of trusted advisors that we can go to. And so that's kind of the next step. Once we've kind of done all of our work that I mentioned, is to turn it over to that investment banker. And we usually make introductions with 2 or 3 bankers, investment bankers, have the client make the decision. And then that starts a whole new process.
Well, it's interesting that several times you mentioned helping the company grow, and this is at a point that they're ready to sell. And when you talk about business development, many people think business development has to do with marketing and sales, and yet you're growing a company with advisory. You're growing a company by, number one, doing an audit so you know exactly where they are currently, and then you're looking at management capability. Will management be staying on, or just a company that's looking to buy will have the management to take over? You're also recommending different avenues that they should take during that year to stabilize themselves and make themselves look more attractive.
No, you raise a good point. So if you're a business owner, you're looking to grow, you're like, my revenues are flat, I'm not really sure what I'm doing wrong, I'm attending meetings, I'm making cold calls, I'm doing business development. Well, let's take a step back. Let's talk about some of the fundamentals. And this is kind of what we do, and we help businesses think through is, what are your mission and vision and values? What do you stand for as a company? What is the value that you're trying to bring to your clients? And believe me, if Coca-Cola and Amazon and these sort of companies have thought through very carefully their mission and vision and value, you need to, if you're a business owner of a private company. So that's kind of step one. And then there's another term that we use and we help businesses look at, that's SCA. What is their sustainable competitive advantage? And so that really is what is the value that you're bringing to your marketplace. And then, another framework that we can use is STP. I don't know if you've heard that one, segment, target, and position.
Yeah.
So how are you segmenting your market? For us, Grosse Collins, we're segmenting it by industry. But depending on the business, you may segment it by age. There's a lot of different ways to segment a market. And then which of those segments are you targeting? Because the more specific you can be, the better. Then how are you positioning yourself within those specific segments? And so, that's kind of what Grosse Collins has done. Obviously, we've looked at the market. We have different segments, and we're not marketing or doing business development for public companies. They're all private companies. And so we've looked at kind of a sweet spot. Our really sweet spot is maybe 20 million in revenues to 200 in revenues. Yes, do we have companies outside? But, that's kind of our sweet spot across the different industries. And then, how we position ourselves within those different segments, it really kind of depends on the segment. So it kind of does vary by that.
Well, it's interesting you say that about the demographics of, actually you're talking about the firmographics, which is really the demographics of the kinds of markets that you're dealing with. But drilling down to the demographics, the specifics of who you're dealing with, what I find, because that's private heli companies are also my sweet spot, I find that their makeup is all over the board.
Yeah.
They're not,
They're not focused.
Right. You could have one company that started out with an engineer that had a patent and grew a $50 million business, but he meets his Peter principle when it comes to managing a company or managing his finances. So you bring the professionalism to those individuals.
And that's where Grosse Collins was, 10 years ago. We were all kind of generalists. We were all trying to go out and get business, but we weren't really focused. And it's a much different conversation that you could have with a business owner. Is you can say, listen, I'm the segment leader for manufacturing distribution. I'm an expert in that area. I understand the trends. I understand exactly what's happening. It gives you more credibility, and I think it's more value add to the client as well. And
Absolutely.
So we are very industry focused. Now, my practice, I tend to be a little bit more of a generalist, but that's just because I support the entire firm. So I provide business advisory services across all of our segments. So I have to be a little bit more of a generalist. I like to use this term. It's not my term. I stole it from somebody else, but I like to consider myself a deep generalist. So I have a lot of general knowledge and general information, but then I have some very deep focus areas. For instance, you mentioned the business valuation, business transition planning, internal control, and that sort of thing.
I had an interesting, just to share some war stories. I was with three brothers. They had heavy industrial equipment, and they were all in there. I think the youngest was late 50s, and three brothers, the late was in the middle 60s. And I asked them, what's your end game? And they looked at me like they never heard the question before.
Right.
And they hadn't.
Yeah.
And one brother said, well, I'm thinking about maybe selling. And the other two brothers looked at him like, what?
Right.
So this brings up, the talking about a buy-sell agreement and how important that could be, and how partners do not understand that if something happens to one partner, you're not just dealing with the spouse, you might be dealing with the spouse's boyfriend. So can you kind of explain?
No, buy-sell agreements are important. It is amazing how many companies don't think to do that. But just to educate our listeners, if you're not familiar with this sort of agreement, it basically goes through all the eventualities that could potentially happen. It's important for any business, but it's certainly more critical when you have multiple business owners, and which at Grosse Collins, a lot of our clients, there's 2 or 3 different business owners. But what happens if one of the business owner dies? Mm-hmm. What happens if they want to sell their interest? What interest what's the value of that interest once it's sold? And so it covers all of those areas. There's a lot of attorneys that we work with that specialize in this area, but no, it is definitely very critical.
But what's really important is what you offer, and that's the valuation of the business, because the buy-sell is going to be predicated on that value today and projecting what it might be in the future.
Yeah, so there's different formulas that you can use, but a lot of buy-sell agreements basically say that in the eventuality that there's some sort of exit, then you hire an independent third-party appraiser to value the business. So.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask a series of questions for short answers.
That time really flew by.
It does. It does. In what way do you see innovation affecting your clients or the industries in general?
It definitely impacts our clients. It impacts us as well. I mean, I just think about us as a firm, how the software that we've brought in to better manage our business. Listen, if you're not keeping up with the latest technology, your competitors are. Somebody is, and so make sure you understand, and whether that's better software to manage your business. Make sure that you're keeping up with the latest trends, especially as they impact your industry.
Well, that's on the infrastructure side, if you will, but on the marketing side, keeping up with what your competition is or what value you could bring that's not being currently addressed in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is kind of fundamental stuff that has not really changed a whole lot over time. But yeah, certainly understand your industry, understand your value proposition, what's your sustainable competitive advantage. So another exercise that we do with clients is we look at where they are as compared to their competition, and what can they do better to beat their competition. So there's a whole exercise around that.
And with the emphasis on the present administration on manufacturing, do you see that as a growth curve for companies?
I think so. I mean, it's a complicated area now with the tariffs. So kind of depending on what you're manufacturing and where you're getting your materials to do the manufacturing, it could be good or bad with the current political climate with what's happening. A lot of people are saying there's going to be a trade war. So.
Well, that's right, but that's where advice comes in. Very handy. Before we sign off, there's got to be some interesting war stories that you've had in your career, and they're always enjoyable. Anything to share?
Sure. Well, we had one client, and their business model was basically hunting for treasure in the Caribbean.
Aren't we all?
Euphemistically referred to as marine salvage. But it was really, really interesting because they kind of came to me because they wanted me to put together financial projections, and so they can go out to investors and raise money. And so it was kind of a probability-weighted financial forecast. He was basically saying, well, okay, if we find this particular ship, that's going to be $1 billion. If we find this ship, it'll be this. And it was really kind of an interesting engagement. They're not clients anymore, and I've kind of lost track of them. But they did supposedly have some interesting technology that they were developing that was going to help them find the buried treasure. So are we all trying to find that buried treasure?
Did they ever find it, do you know?
Not that I know of. No, you would have read about them probably in the newspaper.
Well, that's great. Well, I think we're just about out of time. So Jeff Plank of HLB Gross Collins, thank you for being with us today. This is Artie Ruderman reminding you to keep developing your business.
On behalf of the Pro Business Channel Networks, we want to thank our guests, sponsors, and you, the audience, for joining us on the Business Developers Network. This episode made possible in part by Innovative Growth Solutions. For more info, visit igscorp.net. Today's broadcast can be heard on demand on your favorite internet channels, including iHeartRadio, iTunes, Google Play, and across the PBC syndicated networks. We invite you to share the show using the posted social media links and join Artie Ruderman and his guests on the next episode of the Business Developers Network.